Why was no one looking at her? The Pacific dawn broke over Coronado like liquid gold, spilling across the training grounds where 60 SEAL candidates stood at attention, their breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. It was 600 hours on a Monday that would change everything. And Caitlin Brennan, all 5'3" of her, red hair pulled back in a regulation bun, green eyes scanning the exhausted faces before her, stood at the head of the formation like she belonged there. Because she did. At 26, she looked more like a college athlete than someone who'd survived 2 combat deployments in Iraq and 1 in Syria. That was precisely her advantage. People underestimated her, always had, always would, and she'd learned long ago that underestimation was just another weapon in the arsenal. "Obstacle course," she called out, her voice carrying that particular quality of command that comes not from volume but from absolute certainty. "Full gear, 15 minutes. Anyone slower than that runs it again." A few candidates exchanged glances. The standard time was 18 minutes. She was pushing them, testing them the way her father had pushed every SEAL who'd passed through his hands during 30 years of service. Rear Admiral Declan Brennan had been a legend. SEAL Team 2, Gulf War hero. The man who'd written half the close-quarters combat manual still used today. Cancer had taken him in 2020, but his legacy lived in every corner of this base, and most powerfully in the daughter he'd trained from the age of 8. The candidates moved out, boots pounding sand. Caitlin watched them attack the first obstacle, a 30-foot cargo net that swayed treacherously in the ocean breeze. This was her world now. After the shrapnel wound in Syria had ended her intelligence career, teaching had seemed like a consolation prize. But she discovered it was something more, something essential. "Still pushing them hard, I see." The voice came from behind her, warm with approval and age. Captain Everett Vandermeer, 67 years old and retired for 7 years, but still carrying himself like the SEAL instructor he'd been for 4 decades. Silver hair cropped military short, weathered face creased with smile lines earned from training 3 generations of warriors. "Dutch," Caitlin's formal bearing softened slightly. "Didn't expect you this early." "Couldn't sleep." Vandermeer moved to stand beside her, his eyes tracking the candidates with the automatic assessment of a lifelong teacher. "Kept thinking about your dad. 5 years ago yesterday, he pinned on his admiral stars. Seems like last week." They stood in silence for a moment, watching a candidate struggle with the rope climb. The young man's arms trembled, his grip failing. He fell, hit the sand, immediately jumped up to try again. "That one's got heart," Vandermeer observed. "Heart's not enough. He's using his arms instead of his legs. Brennan method says lock your feet, drive with your hips, let the big muscles do the work." Vandermeer smiled slightly. "I remember when Declan first showed me that technique. 1982, I think. Turned conventional rope climbing on its head, cut training injuries by 40%. Caitlin watched the candidate try again, this time adjusting his technique. He made it halfway up before fatigue claimed him. Better, learning. "The Rangers are coming today," Vandermeer said, his tone shifting. "Joint training program. Lieutenant Commander Garrett asked me to observe." "I know, 1,400 hours." Caitlin kept her eyes on the course, but something in her voice tightened. 75th Regiment, fresh from Afghanistan. Some of them are going to have attitudes. "Old school thinking." Vandermeer chose his words carefully. "Just watch yourself, Cat. I know the type." "I've dealt with worse than attitudes, Dutch." "I know you have." He paused, then added quietly, "But your dad isn't here anymore to back you up." Caitlin turned to face him fully. In the morning light, she could see the concern etched in his features. The protective instinct that had made him drive from his home in La Jala at dawn to deliver this warning. "I don't need him to back me up," she said softly. "He taught me to back myself up." Vandermeer's expression shifted to something like pride. "He did at that." A whistle cut the air. The first candidate had finished the course. 14 minutes, 40 seconds. Caitlin checked her stopwatch and nodded approval. "I'll be fine," she told Vandermeer. "It's just a training demonstration." But the old SEAL instructor had learned to trust his instincts over 40 years of combat and teaching. Something about today felt off. He couldn't name it, couldn't point to a specific reason, just a tightness in his chest. A whisper of warning his younger self would have called superstition, and his current self knew better than to ignore. "I'll be in the observation room this afternoon," he said, "just in case." The candidates were finishing now, most making the time, a few falling short and turning around to run it again without being told. Good discipline. Caitlin made mental notes on each one. These weren't just bodies to push through training. Each was someone's son, someone's husband, someone's brother. Each would go into harm's way relying on what she taught them. "Dismissed," she called out. "Breakfast, then combat water survival at 900. Don't be late." The candidates dispersed, some limping, all exhausted, but wearing the particular expression of men who'd been tested and passed. Caitlin gathered her clipboard and water bottle, preparing to head to the office for the inevitable paperwork. "Kat," Vandermeer's hand touched her shoulder lightly. "Your dad would be proud of who you've become. I hope you know that." She met his eyes, saw the sincerity there. The grief they shared for the man who'd meant everything to her and had been like a brother to him. "I know," she said. "I feel him here sometimes, on the course, in the techniques, in every candidate who refuses to quit." The office Caitlin occupied was small but functional. Gray walls, government tissue desk, filing cabinets containing training records and medical certifications. But on one wall, carefully arranged, hung the evidence of a life lived in service. A Bronze Star, earned in Fallujah in 2020 when she'd led a team that extracted 3 wounded Marines under heavy fire. A Purple Heart, the physical reminder of the shrapnel that had torn through her left shoulder in Syria, ending her field career at 24. A photograph of her father in dress whites, taken the day he made admiral, his chest decorated with ribbons representing 3 decades of classified operations and unclassified heroism. And in the center, in a small shadow box, the item she treasured most, her father's dog tags, worn thin from years against his chest, handed to her by the Navy chaplain the day after cancer finally claimed the toughest man she'd ever known. She didn't usually allow herself to look at them during work hours. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford when candidates needed her to be harder than granite. But this morning, with Dutch's warning echoing in her mind and the Rangers arriving in 8 hours, she permitted herself a moment. "Miss you, Dad," she whispered to the photograph. The answer came not in words but in memory. 10 years old, backyard in Virginia Beach, her father showing her how to break a wrist. 15, summer break, Vandermeer's private training sessions where she learned techniques most SEALs never mastered. 18, her father's hands on her shoulders after she'd aced the physical qualification test. "You're ready," he'd said, "not because you're my daughter, because you're a warrior." A knock at the door pulled her back to the present. "Come in." Lieutenant Commander Hale Garrett entered, a folder tucked under his arm. 42. Lean and weathered with the particular intensity of men who'd spent their careers in special operations. He respected Caitlin in a way some officers didn't. Perhaps because he'd served under her father in 2008, or perhaps because he was smart enough to recognize competence regardless of gender. "Morning, Brennan. Good session today." "Solid. 3 candidates are borderline on the rope climb, but they're improving. I'll work with them individually this week." Garrett nodded, settling into the chair across from her desk. "About this afternoon, the joint training with the Rangers. I've prepared a demonstration of the Brennan method, hand-to-hand combat fundamentals, defensive tactics, the same curriculum I use with the candidates." "I know you have." Garrett paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I need to be straight with you. The Rangers requested this training, but not everyone in their unit is enthusiastic about it. Because I'm a woman. Because some of them are idiots. Garrett's tone was flat. I've dealt with Captain Morrison before, 75th Regiment. Good tactical mind, but he's got some people under him who think special operations should be an all-male club. Caitlin leaned back in her chair. You want me to cancel? Hell no, I want you to do exactly what you're planning. Demonstrate the techniques. Show them what you're capable of. But I also want you to be prepared for resistance, maybe even hostility. I've handled hostility before, sir. I know, your record speaks for itself, but this is different, this is personal. Garrett opened the folder, slid a personnel file across the desk. Staff Sergeant Kyle Hutchkins, combat veteran, multiple tour, Bronze Star, also multiple informal complaints from female personnel. Nothing that stuck but a pattern. Caitlin studied the photograph. Hard face, cold eyes. The kind of man who'd learned to navigate the system just well enough to avoid consequences. He's coming to the demonstration. He volunteered, specifically requested to participate in the sparring portion. He wants to embarrass me. He wants to prove a point, that women don't belong in combat roles, that your father's legacy is wasted on you. Something cold settled in Caitlin's chest. Not fear, recognition. She'd faced men like Hutchkins before, men who saw her gender before they saw her skill, men who needed to dominate, to prove, to crush anything that challenged their worldview. Let him come, she said quietly. I'll be ready. What do you say to a man who's already decided you're not worth listening to? At 1400 hours, Caitlin stood in the main training facility, a converted warehouse with padded floors, mirrored walls, and enough space for 50 people to train simultaneously. The Rangers had arrived in full force. 35 men in PT gear, ranging in age from early 20s to late 40s. Most looked curious, some looked skeptical, and a few, including Staff Sergeant Kyle Hutchkins, looked openly hostile. Captain Morrison stood at the front, a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent his entire adult life in uniform. He shook Garrett's hand, then turned to Caitlin with an expression that was polite but reserved. Petty Officer Brennan, Captain Morrison, 75th Ranger Regiment, thank you for hosting us. It's an honor, sir. My father spoke highly of the regiment. I served with Declan in 03, best combat instructor I ever met. Morrison's expression softened slightly. I was sorry to hear about his passing. Thank you, sir. From somewhere in the back of the formation, a voice muttered just loud enough to carry. Let's see if the daughter's half as good. Caitlin didn't react, didn't even look in that direction. She'd learned long ago that the first person to show emotion in these situations was the first person to lose credibility. Instead, she moved to the center of the mat and addressed the group directly. Gentlemen, the Brennan method was developed over 3 decades by my father, Rear Admiral Declan Brennan, based on his experience in SEAL operations and close-quarters combat. It's designed around 3 principles: leverage over strength, economy of motion, and exploiting vulnerabilities. Today, I'll demonstrate the fundamentals and then invite volunteers to participate in controlled sparring. She paused, meeting eyes across the formation. The goal isn't to prove who's stronger or tougher. The goal is to show you techniques that will keep you alive in combat when size and strength aren't on your side. Because in the field, the enemy doesn't care how much you can bench press. They care about finding your weaknesses and exploiting them before you exploit theirs. A few Rangers nodded. The majority remained impassive. And Hutchkins, standing in the back row with his arms crossed, wore an expression of barely concealed contempt. I'll need a volunteer for the first demonstration. Several hands went up immediately. Caitlin selected a young Ranger, early 20s, who looked nervous but willing. Name and rank. Private First Class Miller, ma'am. All right, Miller, come at me like you're trying to grab my weapon. Full speed, don't hold back. Miller hesitated. Ma'am, I don't want to. That's an order, Private. Attack. Miller lunged, fast and committed. His hand reached for the training pistol on Caitlin's belt. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Caitlin pivoted, trapped Miller's wrist, used his momentum to pull him off balance and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, controlled, not full force. Miller went down hard, gasping. She helped him up immediately, her hand steady on his arm. You okay? Miller nodded, still catching his breath. Yes, ma'am. What just happened? You committed to a straight-line attack. I redirected your energy and exploited your momentum. In a real situation, that elbow strike would have crushed your sternum. Let's run it again. This time, watch my feet. They ran the technique 5 more times, each repetition slower, each explanation more detailed. By the end, Miller was starting to grasp the concept. The other Rangers were leaning forward, paying attention now. The key, Caitlin explained, isn't strength. It's timing and positioning. If you wait until someone's already committed, you can use their force against them. That's how a 120-pound operator can take down a 200-pound enemy. She demonstrated 3 more techniques: a wrist lock, a takedown from a rear choke, a disarm against a knife attack. Each time she selected a different volunteer. Each time she moved with that particular efficiency that comes from 10,000 hours of practice. The Rangers were engaged now, even the skeptics, even. That only works if your opponent doesn't know it's coming. The voice cut through the room. Hutchkins stepped forward from the back row, his expression challenging. Staff Sergeant Hutchkins, ma'am, with respect, these demonstrations are staged. You know what your volunteer's going to do. You've practiced the response. In a real fight against a trained opponent who's not pulling punches, it's different. Caitlin met his eyes, saw the calculation there. This wasn't about learning. This was about dominance, about proving a point to everyone watching. You're right, she said calmly. Demonstrations are controlled. Real combat isn't. Would you like to test the techniques under more realistic conditions? Hutchkins smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I'd be honored, ma'am. Captain Morrison stepped forward. Hutchkins. It's all right, sir, Caitlin said. The sergeant makes a valid point. Let's see how the techniques hold up under pressure. Vandermeer was in the observation room above, watching through the one-way glass. She could feel his presence, his concern, but also his faith, because he'd trained her too, knew exactly what she was capable of. Hutchkins stepped onto the mat. 6'2", maybe 210 pounds, all muscle, combat veteran with multiple deployments and the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. He thought he was going to make an example of her, thought he was going to prove that women had no place in special operations, thought this was going to be easy. He was wrong. Rules of engagement, Garrett called out, moving to referee. Controlled sparring, no strikes to the head or groin, no joint locks held past the tap-out. This is training, not a street fight. Understood. Both nodded. Begin. Hutchkins didn't waste time. He came in fast, aggressive, trying to use his size to overwhelm her. A straight punch aimed at her midsection, then a grab for her collar. Caitlin moved like water. She slipped the punch, trapped his extended arm, and drove her knee into his thigh, not the quadriceps but the nerve cluster on the inside. Hutchkins stumbled. His leg buckled. Before he could recover, she was behind him, had his arm locked in a control hold, and drove him face first toward the mat. He caught himself at the last second, rolled, came up angry. Lucky, he muttered. They reset. This time Hutchkins was more cautious. He circled, looking for an opening. Caitlin matched his movements, staying just outside his reach, waiting, patient. He feinted left, then drove in from the right. A tackle, classic wrestling move, all his weight behind it. Caitlin dropped her hip, absorbed the impact, and used his momentum to throw him over her shoulder. Hutchkins hit the mat hard. The sound echoed through the warehouse. She didn't give him time to think, followed him down, applied a shoulder lock, just enough pressure to make it clear she could dislocate his arm if she wanted to. "Tap," Garrett called. Hutchkins tapped, reluctantly. They stood. Hutchkins was breathing hard now, sweating, angry, but something else was happening. The other Rangers were watching with different eyes, not skepticism anymore, something closer to respect. Again, Hutchkins demanded. "Stand down, Sergeant," Morrison said. "Sir, That's an order," she's made her point. But Caitlin saw something in Hutchins's eyes, something beyond pride or ego, something darker, resentment, humiliation, the kind of emotion that festers, that doesn't forget. She'd made an enemy today. She knew it. And somehow, standing there in the center of the mat with 35 Rangers watching and Vandermeer observing from above, and her father's ghost looking on from wherever the dead go to watch their children. Somehow she knew this wasn't over. How do you prove yourself to men who have already decided you're less than? The demonstration ended at 1600 hours. Most of the Rangers approached Caitlin afterward, asked questions about technique, requested reading materials on the Brennan method. Professional, respectful, the kind of interaction that should have defined the whole afternoon. But Hutchkins didn't approach, didn't ask questions. He left with 3 other Rangers, men who'd watched the sparring with expressions that mirrored his hostility. They clustered near the exit, speaking in low voices, shooting glances back at Caitlin that carried unmistakable contempt. Vandermeer descended from the observation room, his weathered face tight with concern. "That went well," he said, "except for the part where you made a very dangerous enemy." "I know. Hutchkins isn't just sexist, Cat. He's got a mean streak. I've seen his type before. The kind who can't handle being beaten by someone they consider inferior. I didn't have a choice, Dutch. If I'd held back, they would have said I couldn't handle combat. If I'd beaten him worse, I would have humiliated him in front of his unit. There was no winning move here." Garrett approached, handed Caitlin a water bottle. "Morrison wants to continue the joint training program, monthly demonstrations." He was impressed. "That's good. But he's also putting Hutchkins on notice. Informal warning about his attitude toward female personnel. It won't go in his file, but it's documented." Caitlin drank deeply. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd been operating on high alert for 3 hours. Every muscle felt tight, every nerve raw. "I want to increase security protocols," Vandermeer said. "Background checks on everyone who interacts with the candidates. Limited access to the facility after hours. Better lighting in the parking areas." "Dutch, you're being paranoid." "I'm being careful. There's a difference." Garrett's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned. "NCIS wants to speak with you, Brennan. Something about a background investigation. They didn't give details." "NCIS?" Caitlin's instincts prickled. Naval Criminal Investigative Service didn't get involved unless something serious was happening. When? "Tomorrow morning, 800, their office in San Diego." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Evening training with the candidates, paperwork, a call with her mother in Virginia, carefully not mentioning the afternoon's events because her mother worried enough already. Dinner alone in her small apartment overlooking the bay. And then, finally, sleep. But sleep brought dreams. Her father's voice, steady and certain. "When they come at you, Cat, they'll come hard because you scare them, because you represent change they're not ready for, but you stand anyway. You fight anyway, because someone has to hold the line." She woke at 5:30, went for a run, showered, and dressed in her service uniform. Whatever NCIS wanted, she'd face it professionally. The NCIS field office was a nondescript building in downtown San Diego. Caitlin checked in with the receptionist, was escorted to a conference room on the third floor. Inside, a woman in her late 40s sat reviewing files, dark hair shot with silver, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Petty Officer Brennan, I'm Special Agent Laura Sullivan. Thank you for coming in. Ma'am, Caitlin sat, her posture military straight. I was told you wanted to discuss a background investigation. Not exactly. Sullivan closed the file. I want to discuss Staff Sergeant Kyle Hutchkins. Caitlin kept her expression neutral. The ranger from yesterday's demonstration. The same. We've had Hutchkins under surveillance for 3 months. He's involved in illegal weapons trafficking, selling military-grade equipment to civilian buyers. We believe he's connected to a larger network, possibly including militia groups with extremist ties. The room felt suddenly smaller. And you're telling me this because? Because yesterday, after your demonstration, Hutchkins met with 2 men we've been tracking. One is a known arms dealer. The other is connected to a domestic extremist organization. They discussed you. Specifically, they discussed ways to discredit you. Caitlin's hands clenched involuntarily. Discredit me how? We don't have specifics yet, but Hutchkins is angry, humiliated, and he's connecting with dangerous people who share his worldview that women don't belong in combat roles. We're concerned he might escalate. To violence, possibly, or to something that destroys your reputation. False accusations, fabricated evidence. We've seen it before with men like him. They can't beat you physically, so they try to destroy you professionally. Sullivan slid a photograph across the table. Hutchkins and 2 other men, grainy surveillance image, outside a warehouse in El Cajon. We need your help, petty officer. We need someone on the inside who can help us build a case against Hutchkins and his network. Someone he might underestimate. Someone he might reveal information to if he thinks he's in control. You want me to go undercover. We want you to continue doing your job. But if Hutchkins approaches you, if he tries to intimidate you or recruit you or do anything that gives us leverage, we need you to cooperate with our investigation. Caitlin stared at the photograph. Hutchkins's face, cold and calculating, a man who'd worn the uniform, taken the oath, and somewhere along the way had decided his personal beliefs mattered more than the law. What if he tries something violent? Then you defend yourself the way you've been trained, but you also document everything. Record conversations if you can. Keep a detailed log of interactions. Give us evidence we can use in court. And if this goes sideways, if my name ends up connected to a federal investigation. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. Your father was a friend of the agency. He helped us with several cases during his career. We don't forget that. If you help us, we'll protect you. But I won't lie to you, this could be dangerous. Hutchkins has already proven he's willing to break the law. We don't know how far he'll go. Caitlin thought about her father, about the photograph in her office, about the legacy he'd left and the standard he'd set. He would have helped, without hesitation, because some fights were bigger than personal safety. I'll do it, she said, but I have conditions. I continue training the candidates. No one at the base knows about this investigation, and if Hutchkins threatens anyone under my command, all bets are off. Agreed. Sullivan stood, extended her hand. Welcome to the team, petty officer. Try not to get killed. When does a warrior become a target? The call came 3 days later. Private number. Caitlin almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Brennan. Petty officer. The voice was familiar, cold. Hutchkins, we need to talk. Every instinct screamed danger, but she kept her voice level, professional. About what, Staff Sergeant? About your demonstration, about disrespect, about what happens when someone forgets their place. Caitlin activated the recording app Sullivan had installed on her phone. Hidden, encrypted, automatically uploading to NCIS servers. I'm not sure what you mean. You embarrassed me. In front of my unit, in front of my command, that has consequences. It was a training demonstration, nothing personal. Hutchkins laughed. The sound was sharp, humorless. Everything is personal in our world, you should know that. Your father certainly did. The mention of her father sent ice through her veins. What do you want, Hutchkins? I want you to understand something. Women like you, thinking you can do men's work, thinking you deserve to be in special operations. You're destroying the military from the inside, weakening standards, making us soft. Is there a point to this call? The point is that I'm watching you, and I'm not the only one. There are people who believe in protecting the integrity of the service, people who are willing to do what's necessary to preserve it. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. You had your moment, Brennan, you made your point. Now it's time to step back, resign your position, find a nice desk job somewhere before something unfortunate happens. The line went dead. Caitlin sat in her apartment staring at her phone. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. Pure, white-hot fury at the audacity of this man who thought he could intimidate her, who thought threats would make her back down. She called Sullivan immediately. I got it, every word. Good, that's terroristic threatening. We can add it to the case. But Brennan, be careful. This escalates from here. Sullivan was right. 2 days later, someone slashed all 4 tires on Caitlin's truck in the base parking lot. No witnesses. No cameras in that particular section. Just a message. 3 days after that, an anonymous complaint was filed against her with the Inspector General. Allegations of inappropriate conduct with male candidates. Completely fabricated, easily disproven, but damaging nonetheless. Vandermeer found her in the office, staring at the formal inquiry letter. They're coming after you. I know. This is Hutchkins. I know that too. What are you going to do? Caitlin looked up, met his eyes, saw the worry there, the protectiveness, the same expression her father used to wear when she was facing something difficult. I'm going to keep doing my job. I'm going to train the candidates. I'm going to cooperate with NCIS. And I'm going to let Hutchkins keep thinking he's winning. Kat, this man is dangerous. So am I. But that night, alone in her apartment, Caitlin wasn't so sure. She sat on her couch with a glass of whiskey she didn't drink and her father's dog tags in her hand, and the weight of everything pressing down like a physical force. The threats, the harassment, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that somewhere out there Kyle Hutchkins and his associates were planning something, and she was the target. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. She opened it, felt her blood run cold. A photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. Her leaving the NCIS office 3 days ago. The caption, "We know what you're doing, back off." She forwarded it to Sullivan immediately, then sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of her own breathing, wondering how this had become her life. Wondering if she was strong enough to see it through. Her father's voice in her head, steady as always. Strength isn't about never being afraid, Kat. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. She picked up her phone, typed a response to the unknown number. Come find me yourself if you want to talk. I'll be right here. Then she set the phone aside, finished the whiskey, and went to bed. Tomorrow she'd train the candidates. Tomorrow she'd hold the line. Tomorrow she'd be exactly who her father raised her to be. But tonight, just for a moment, she let herself be human. Let herself feel the fear and the anger and the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting battles that shouldn't need to be fought. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Sometimes it just endures. What happens when a predator realizes he's been hunting the wrong prey? The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a Saturday night when most of the base was quiet and Caitlin was working late in her office, reviewing training schedules for the upcoming cycle. The door opened without a knock. Hutchkins stood in the doorway, not in uniform, civilian clothes, dark jacket, jeans, and in his eyes something that went beyond anger, something feral. "You didn't take my advice," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Caitlin's hand moved instinctively to her desk drawer. The service pistol she kept there, locked but accessible, but she didn't open it. Not yet. "This is a restricted area, Staff Sergeant. You need to leave." "I don't think so." Hutchins moved closer, invading her space, using his size to intimidate. "I think it's time you and I had a real conversation. No cameras, no witnesses, just us." "There are cameras everywhere on this base. Not in the old storage building. Not in the sections they haven't renovated yet. Lots of quiet places where people could have accidents." The threat was explicit now. No pretense, no coded language, just raw menace. Caitlin stood slowly, putting the desk between them, creating distance, buying time. Her mind ran through scenarios. Hutchins outweighed her by 80 pounds, close quarters, no backup, but she had training he didn't, techniques designed for exactly this situation. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing right now," she said quietly. "This is assault, unlawful entry, threatening a superior officer. You walk out that door right now, maybe this doesn't destroy your career." Hutchins laughed. "My career? You think I care about my career? I've got something better lined up. Freedom, real money. No more taking orders from people who don't understand what this country needs." "The weapons trafficking." His eyes narrowed. "What do you know about that?" "I know you're selling military equipment to extremist groups. I know NCIS has been watching you for months. I know you're going to prison, Hutchins. The only question is whether you go down for trafficking or whether we add assault and attempted murder to the charges." Something shifted in his expression, calculation, and then decision. He lunged. Fast, violent, hands reaching for her throat. Caitlin moved on pure instinct, slipped left, trapped his extended arm, drove her elbow into his ribs with everything she had, felt something crack. Hutchins roared, pain and rage mixing, grabbed her with his other hand, threw her against the filing cabinet. She hit hard, stars exploded in her vision, but training overrode shock. She rolled, came up with the desk chair between them. "Security's been called," she gasped. "You have maybe 90 seconds." 90 seconds is enough." He came at her again. This time she was ready, caught his punch on the chair, shoved it into him, used the momentum to drive her knee into his already injured ribs. Hutchins stumbled. She pressed the advantage, wrist lock, leverage, the Brennan method executed with desperate precision. Hutchins went down hard. The door burst open. Vandermeer, Garrett, 2 MPs with weapons drawn. "Freeze, hands where we can see them." Hutchins tried to rise. One of the MPs put him on the ground with professional efficiency. Handcuffs clicked. Caitlin leaned against her desk, breathing hard, tasting blood. Her lip was split, ribs screaming, but she was alive. Vandermeer's hands were on her shoulders. "Kat, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "I'm okay. He's the one with the broken ribs." Garrett was on his phone, calling NCIS. Within minutes, the office was swarming with federal agents. Sullivan arrived personally, took one look at Caitlin's face, and turned to Hutchins with an expression of pure professional fury. "Kyle Hutchins, you're under arrest for assault on a federal officer, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warnings faded into background noise. Caitlin watched them lead Hutchins away. He was shouting now, threats, accusations, promises of what would happen when his friends found out. But Sullivan had anticipated this. Within hours, coordinated raids hit 6 locations across Southern California. Hutchins's associates, the arms dealers, the militia cell that had been planning an attack on a federal facility using weapons Hutchins had provided. 12 arrests, enough evidence to put them away for decades. And Caitlin, bruised, exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness, sat in the NCIS field office at 200 hours, giving her statement for the third time to federal prosecutors. "You did good work, petty officer," Sullivan said when the lawyers finally left. "The case is solid because of you. I just wanted to teach SEALs hand-to-hand combat." "I know, but sometimes the job chooses us, not the other way around." Vandermeer drove her home through the pre-dawn darkness. Neither spoke until they reached her driveway. "You know what your father would say?" Vandermeer asked. "That I should have called for backup sooner." "That too, but also that he was proud of you, for standing your ground, for not backing down when they tried to make you." Caitlin looked at the old SEAL instructor. This man who'd been her father's best friend, who'd trained her when she was just a kid who wanted to be like her dad, who'd watched over her for years now, trying to protect her the way he hadn't been able to protect Declan from cancer. "Thank you, Dutch, for being here, for caring, for not giving up on me even when I was too stubborn to ask for help. That's what family does." Inside her apartment, Caitlin stood before her father's photograph for a long time. The sun was rising, golden light streaming through the windows. "It's done, Dad," she said quietly. "Hutchins is going away, the trafficking network is dismantled, and I'm still standing." The photograph looked back with eternal calm, but she thought she could feel his approval anyway, in the warmth of the morning sun, in the ache of her bruised ribs that proved she'd fought back, in the simple fact that she'd survived. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, sometimes it fights. How do you rebuild when you've been torn down? 3 weeks passed. Hutchins was formally charged with 14 federal crimes. His associates, including 2 other Rangers and a former Marine, faced similar charges. The weapons trafficking network was dismantled. Military equipment worth over $2 million was recovered before it could reach extremist groups. And Caitlin Brennan received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroic achievement, involving risk of life, while serving as an undercover operative in a federal weapons trafficking investigation. The ceremony was small, Captain Garrett presiding, Sullivan representing NCIS, Vandermeer in the front row, wearing his dress blues despite retirement because some moments demanded the full uniform. "Petty Officer Caitlin Brennan," Garrett read from the citation, "for valor in preventing a bombing that would have caused multiple casualties, and for extraordinary courage in the face of personal danger while gathering evidence that led to the dismantling of a domestic terrorism network. It is my privilege to present you with this medal." The citation was read. Applause followed. But what Caitlin focused on was the small group watching from the gallery. 20 SEAL candidates, the ones she'd trained every morning, looking at her with new respect, new understanding. After the ceremony, Garrett pulled her aside. "I've received authorization to offer you a new position, advanced hand-to-hand combat instructor. You'd be teaching the Brennan method to every SEAL candidate who comes through this facility. Your father's techniques, your innovations, the system that's kept our people alive for 30 years. Caitlin thought about intelligence work, about field operations, about the career she'd planned before Syria changed everything. "I accept." 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Caitlin stood on the training mat in the newly christened Brennan Combat Training Center. The dedication plaque bore her father's name and photograph. She was teaching advanced defensive tactics to 25 SEAL candidates. Among them were 3 women, struggling against the same skepticism Caitlin had faced, the same doubts, the same need to prove themselves twice as hard for half the recognition. One candidate, Petty Officer Sarah Reeves, was paired with a male candidate who outweighed her by 80 pounds. He was holding back. "Problem candidate?" Caitlin asked. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt her." "You won't." Reeves demonstrate technique 17, full speed. Reeves executed perfectly. using leverage and timing to put her partner on the mat in 3 seconds flat. Caitlin helped the male candidate up. What did you learn? That I underestimated her, ma'am. No, you learned that assumptions get you killed in combat. Respect everyone's capability. Gender doesn't matter. Mass doesn't matter. Training matters. She looked at Reeves. Again, this time he won't hold back. The male candidate attacked for real. Reeves defended, countered, controlled, not perfectly, but competently, learning, growing. From the observation gallery, Vandermeer watched with quiet satisfaction. Beside him stood Garrett and Senior Chief Anderson. She's the best instructor we've had in 20 years, Anderson said. She's her father's daughter, Vandermeer replied, and she's just getting started. On the mat, Caitlin continued teaching, pushing candidates, correcting techniques, building warriors who would carry the Brennan method into future battles. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the space where her father's photograph hung. After class, she stood alone in the facility for a moment, touched her father's trident pin, the one Vandermeer had given her after the Hutchins operation, the one she wore every day now. Her phone buzzed, message from Sullivan. Hutchins sentenced today, 18 years federal prison, justice served. Caitlin typed back, thank you for everything. Then she locked the facility, walked to her truck, new tires courtesy of the Navy, and drove home through the San Diego afternoon. At a stoplight, she saw a young woman in Navy PT gear jogging past, focused, determined, chasing her own dreams. That's what this was all about, creating a military where capability mattered more than gender, where excellence was recognized regardless of its source, where young women could look at instructors like her and see possibility instead of barriers. Her father had started that work. She would continue it. At home, Caitlin stood in front of Declan Brennan's photograph one more time. We did it, Dad, she said softly. Justice for the women Hutchins hurt, accountability for the man who betrayed everything you stood for, and a legacy that will outlive us both. The photograph offered no response, but she felt his presence anyway, in the techniques she taught, in the standards she maintained, in every candidate who refused to quit. Her father had taught her, finish what you start no matter the cost. She had finished this, but the work continued, would always continue, because the fight for dignity, for respect, for the right to serve based on merit, that fight didn't end with one victory. It was won every day, in every training session, in every candidate who learned that strength comes in many forms, in every woman who refused to be diminished by those who feared change. The sun set over Coronado, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And Caitlin Brennan stood at the intersection of past and future, holding the line her father had drawn, making sure that line held firm for generations yet to come. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when the world tries to silence it, when men like Hutchins try to intimidate and diminish and destroy, dignity doesn't retreat. It fights back. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet, unwavering strength. The kind that can't be broken, can't be intimidated, can't be stopped. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some lines are worth holding. Some legacies are worth carrying forward, no matter the cost. Caitlin Brennan had learned that from her father, had proven it in combat, had taught it to hundreds of candidates who would carry those lessons into the darkest places on earth. And she would continue teaching it, for as long as she drew breath, for as long as there were warriors who needed to learn that strength isn't about size or gender or the opinions of those too small-minded to see past their prejudices. Strength is about standing when it would be easier to sit, fighting when it would be safer to flee, holding the line when everyone else has abandoned their posts. That was the Brennan method, not just a series of combat techniques, but a philosophy, a way of being in the world. Her father had lived it, she would honor it, and the candidates she trained would carry it forward into battles not yet fought. The legacy would endure, not in medals or citations or plaques on walls, but in lives saved, in enemies defeated, in young warriors who learned that the person standing beside them in combat earned their place through merit, not through permission from those who thought they controlled who belonged. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Darkness settled over Coronado. But inside Caitlin's small apartment, surrounded by her father's photographs and medals and the quiet evidence of a life lived in service, there was light. Always.